was really the godfather of heroin in Ireland.
The tsunami of heroin suddenly hit Dublin. It went from bad to disastrous overnight.
Some of the kids were robbing their mothers, their fathers. There were syringes on balconies.
This was a life and death issue for an awful lot of people.
The guards were never going to give up. Young people were dying, communities were devastated. He was a mercenary. Nobody had been employed in an undercover capacity working in drugs. It was a dangerous, challenging environment. All roads led to Larry Dunne.
Inner city Dublin in 1980, a tight-knit community suddenly torn apart by a brand new epidemic.
Today, our government recognises that we may have as many as 4,500 heroin users in Dublin City.
They'd inject themselves on stairways, anywhere, gardens.
There's chaos beginning to happen on the street. Some of the kids were robbing their mothers, their fathers.
It's a living hell. You hang out in squats. You'd eat out of dustbins. You would literally do anything for drugs.
The individual addicts felt isolated, hopeless, and were prepared to die knowing they had no other route.
The one man who started this heroin epidemic was Larry Dunne, a professional criminal from a family of professional criminals.
The Dunne criminal gang were what we would now call probably a local Irish cartel. They were the only real gang in town. They were quite powerful, they were very violent, and they were quite ruthless.
The drug squad knew Larry Dunne because he'd had more than 30 convictions, and there were 4 brothers in particular from the family who were working together. Larry Dunne was the biggest of them. He ran the biggest criminal network of importation of heroin.
Michael O'Sullivan is a former Assistant Commissioner of An Garda Síochána.
I joined the Guards in 1977, and in around 1979 to 80s, I was a young detective operating in Dublin City out of Dublin Castle.
Michael joined a team tasked with cracking Ireland's heroin trade and bringing down Larry Dunne.
Prior to what they now call the heroin epidemic, the drug scene really was mainly hippies and a small trickle of hard drugs. The tsunami of heroin suddenly hit Dublin. The police weren't prepared for it, the communities weren't prepared for it. It went from bad to disastrous overnight.
Heavy drug dealing was going on. Many people died, families were destroyed, and communities were ripped apart.
Brendan O'Brien, former journalist with Today Tonight in RTE.
Brendan produced an investigation that for the first time showed Ireland the effect Larry Dunne's heroin was having in Dublin.
The drug scene that I'm describing and that the programme revealed was totally unknown to the wider public.
About 2/3 of Dublin's heroin is brought in by the big commercial pushers. One group in particular controlled most of it.
Heroin was so widespread, it was growing at such a pace that there was probably about 5,000 serious heroin addicts. What was clear to me was, when I talked to these people, that they wanted their story told.
Like, it's hell on earth for anyone that goes on heroin now. Life is fucked, finished.
The more I talked to people and looked at what they were doing, the more I realised that this was a life and death issue for an awful lot of people.
I doubt we'd ever get on. So what do you see up ahead in the future?
Dying.
Nobody knew anything about heroin and heroin sales in 1979, including the criminals. It was just a completely new phenomenon. Open dealing in the flat complexes and on the street corners, their kids going to school, looking at dealers who were supplying heroin to their children, who were attracting other criminals and other drug users. It was a learning curve for everybody. You learned on the street, and the people on the street learned on the street. The drug squad at the time consisted of a sergeant and 7 or 8 men. I realized how fast the problem was growing.
Michael now began to study this new criminal underworld, and the man at its heart, Larry Dunne.
Larry Dunne was part of a very large family from the south inner city, born into an Ireland that was, grindingly poor, and his particular background was especially poor. The family brought in an income by selling clothes on a stall on Francis Street. Because their father was involved in crime, their uncles were involved in crime as well, it was more or less inevitable that the Dunne boys would also become involved in crime, and they became quite well known to the guards from an early age for carrying out things like stealing cash and shoplifting. And of the 10 Dunne boys, all of them bar 2 ended up in various reform schools. Larry himself spent time in a reform school in County Offaly, and really by the 1970s they ran a very well organised robbery gang, and that was their main occupation.
From the late 60s, early 70s, there'd been an upsurge in Northern-related crime. Initially you had paramilitary groups robbing banks and other sources of income, but then ordinary criminals realised how easy it was, so they got in on the act. So you had an upsurge in armed robberies in the 1970s, and detection rates fell quite dramatically.
Larry Dunne seized the opportunity to cash in.
Larry Dunne and his criminal gang were responsible for a lot of bank robberies, jewellery robberies. They would travel throughout the country committing crime.
But armed robbery became an increasingly risky business.
One really influential event occurred in 1980 when 2 Gardaí were shot dead during an armed robbery in Ballahadreen. At that point, a lot of resources were put into the guards, and the guards were told that they had to clamp down on these armed robbery gangs.
The Gardaí managed to get their act together and they set up an emergency response unit. Those units could respond within literally 3 or 4 minutes to a report of a bank robbery. So more and more people got caught robbing banks and penalties increased. So people began to move into other areas of activity which were less risky.
Larry Dunne needed a new way to make money. And events unfolding thousands of miles away gave him the opportunity he needed.
As Gardaí began to clamp down on armed robbery gangs all over Ireland, 2 very significant events took place internationally. You had the revolution in Iran and you had the Russians invading Afghanistan.
The aristocracy there, who owned vast wealth, turned their wealth into something that would make them get their money out fast. They turned it into heroin, they sold it in Europe, and Europe was flooded with heroin.
So conditions were really perfect in that sense for Larry Dunne and his group, who were transitioning really from armed robbery into the drugs trade.
Larry Dunne at the time and his gang had connections with the UK, and he saw the profits that were being made. In around 79 to 80, he began with a number of associates to bring heroin into the Irish market.
Larry Dunne knew exactly where he wanted to sell it, in Dublin's inner city, where he grew up.
My name is Mick Rafferty. Since the early 70s, I've been a community activist, mainly in the north inner city. I grew up in the Docklands in Sheriff Street, which was a complex of flats. The docks were booming. My father was a docker. His grandfather was a docker. But there was a very sudden change with containerisation in the 60s. Within the space of a very short time, there was almost total unemployment.
Well, you had to work. There was other men outside to take a job. You had to pick out your own way of living in life. Otherwise, you go hungry.
The state seemed to adopt the attitude that people were in the way of progress. That was the cause of a lot of issues that arose, a lot of alienation of communities, particularly disaffected youth who were still behaving, to some extent, as if they could leave school and get a job. So they were young, vulnerable, and ripe for manipulation by criminal elements.
Now Larry Dunne flooded the flat complexes of this vulnerable community with heroin.
In the early 80s, it was one of the central places where they sold heroin. And dealers came from all over the city to sell drugs here because it became known as the place.
Children saw addicts shooting up on the balconies, the stairs, even the playgrounds.
They come to the flats because the main supplies was there.
We have seen these addicts come in here in the middle of this playground, and the young children here, and have been injecting themselves.
My name is Anne Buckley. I grew up in Fatima Mansions during the 80s and 90s. 19, I started smoking heroin. It was a difficult time. The women and the families, their minds were consumed with the chaos that was going on, all the drug dealing.
Michael O'Sullivan and his colleagues in the drug squad struggled to police these communities.
Big challenge was that because they focused in the inner city of Dublin, they used flat complexes and lookouts. It was very, very challenging, very difficult to get up close and personal to identify who the dealer was and seize the drugs.
Complexes were a favourite spot because most of them were built around a central square. Teresa's Gardens, for example, or Hardwick Street flats. It's almost like a theatre. You know, you've got these apartments, you've got balconies, and people can look out and chat to each other. You've also got very few entrances, so it's very easy to keep an eye out if the Gardaí are coming along, for example.
They became more innovative and more strategically placed in what you would call mini fortresses with steel gates and steel shutters and windows.
It was clear to Michael that Larry Dunne was responsible for the unfolding heroin epidemic. But gathering enough evidence to arrest him was a challenge. Dunne's nickname said it all.
Larry used to say, Larry doesn't carry.
He wouldn't carry the drugs.
Larry doesn't carry, he had everybody else carrying.
Cracking Larry Dunne's drug-dealing ring required a new approach. For the first time in Irish drugs policing history, detectives from the National Police Service were to be sent undercover.
They decided that one way of dealing with it was to pretend to be addicts. And then once they bought it, they could nab the person selling it to them. And they were called the Mockies because they were mock addicts.
Nobody had been employed in an undercover capacity working in drugs in Ireland. Myself and the people that I worked with had the advantage of the local knowledge. We were from Dublin and we understood the local geography. I was young and small and skinny. I was just an average guy, so I just blended in, I guess. You were dropped in the deep end with the people you worked with and told to make the best of it. It was a dangerous, challenging environment.
Michael posed as a drug user and hit the streets of Dublin.
You went out to infiltrate groups and figure out where the drugs were, who was selling them, how much of it was around. It was about putting the pieces of the jigsaw together, figuring who was who and where the money was coming from and where the money was going and how the heroin was getting in. In dealing with drug dealers, you had to be convincing, you had to look like you needed heroin. You really to be on your guard for a change in the mood of the situation.
If you want care, right, just go up to the flat, right, and you just bring up your money, right, and you can get it straight away like that, and then you just go out and use it.
2 or 3 minutes is a long time to be on your own in any location. In those days, you did this type of work without a radio, without a firearm, so you had nothing to sort of protect yourself. So frequently you would meet drug dealers, and so you frequently found yourself in a back alley off some side street. Backup was really no good to you because they wouldn't find you in that space of time. You took certain risks and it became an occupational hazard. When a move was made to arrest them, some of the people I worked with were assaulted quite badly, stabbed with syringes, got their hands scarred, pieces of flesh bitten off. In the ensuing struggle, violence was just part and parcel of what went on.
40 years on, Ireland's modern drug squad owes its existence to Michael's team of Mockies.
Angela Willis, Detective Chief Superintendent at the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. The basic principles that were developed back then by the original drug squad have grown to what we have today here in this covert bureau, which is the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, the Mockies. I think they demonstrated a desire to tackle the issue and a willingness to acknowledge that this was a significant issue that wasn't going to go away without an appropriate response.
Every day Michael spent undercover as a drug user revealed more about the mechanics of Larry Dunne's heroin operation.
His customer base had greatly increased because the more heroin he sold, the more people got on heroin. The numbers of addicts had greatly increased, and he was making greater profits.
He would allow them use heroin for free, they would run up debts, and he could force them then to go on these courier trips to various parts of Europe and bring his heroin back into Ireland. He then used the same tactic really when he was starting off drug dealing. He would give potential customers of his free drugs, and because he knew that once they took the heroin once or twice, they'd very soon get hooked and they would be back again and again. There were also very few other people dealing heroin at that time. So his investment in that young person by giving them free drugs, that investment really came back to him rather than going back to, some other rival drugs gang.
Larry Dunne had Dublin's inner city in his grip. Meanwhile, he built himself a lavish lifestyle.
He wore very expensive clothes, Armani suits, soft leather shoes. When he was in his pomp, he was making a lot of money, estimated to be about £10,000 per week at one point. And he really embraced this whole lifestyle of the wealthy gang leader. He drove luxury cars. When he was banned from driving, he was able to employ a chauffeur.
Today, the Criminal Assets Bureau gives the state power to seize wealth from known criminals. But in the 1980s, it had yet to be established. Despite Dunne's long list of convictions, his huge wealth was beyond the reach of Michael and the police.
We had a huge disadvantage. If a guy was caught with 20 grand in his house and you couldn't say that was from dealing, well, then he got the 20 grand back. It's as simple as that. And if he bought a big car and he never worked in his life, Larry Dunne, to my knowledge, in all the years, I never knew him to work. These people flaunted their wealth in a community that was devastated. Again, that only heightened the feelings that these people were making money from the misery of and the suffering of their kids.
Larry Dunne's heroin now drove a surge in other types of crime, as drug users broke the law to fund their new habit.
They only did two things. They went out to rob, to make money, to buy drugs, to inject themselves when they got it.
How much a day does it cost you to feed your habit? Probably £100.
Well, where do you get £100 a day?
I couldn't say that.
It would take 100 quid a day to feed your habit. So you can imagine the extent of the criminality that generated.
With drugs, you had people, particularly young people, who were robbing from their own families. They were desperate for money. They'd rob from next door neighbour, they'd rob from elderly people, anyone that was vulnerable.
Apart from money, what else did they steal from you?
They took my shorts, my new shorts.
People wouldn't open their doors. People were afraid to go to the shops. Elderly people were afraid. It was crazy. Like, it was scary.
People were preying on each other, so it created huge tension in communities.
People robbing houses, flats, muggings. It was a complete desperation.
People don't take the problem seriously until it hits them. I remember about 6 months ago talking to some of the families here, some of the parents, and they didn't realise that a problem was going to start.
Michael could now see how Larry Dunne's heroin dealers had infiltrated entire inner city communities.
Some of them were quite brazen, like dealing from their flats. So what you'd have is a queue of people going in to deal. They would shoot up on the stairways.
The community responded by coming together to attempt to drive the dealers out.
We had drug addicts from everywhere. We just got together and said, like, enough was enough, and tried to do something about it for the sake of our children that was getting brought up in the area.
The Concerned Parents Against Drugs was an attempt to have a coordinated pushback against the drug pushers. What you're dealing with is children, and we're talking about children between 12, 13, 14, up to the age of 24 or 5, killing themselves.
As we see people who are on drugs, it's only sinking into
It's not until it actually happens to you that you believe.
Yeah.
And then it's too late.
It was a mass meeting. People said what they thought. Names were given, you know, who was pushing, who was stealing, and it was agreed these people had to leave the community.
One such meeting was organised by two anti-drug campaigners, Mick Rafferty and local politician Tony Gregory.
Each year, over the last few years, 10 young people, mainly in the inner city areas of Dublin, have died from heroin use. And this year, already so far this year, 10 have died.
One of the meetings in Rutland Street School, the man himself, Larry Dunne, came in and I was chairing the meeting and he stood beside me. And I can tell you I was a bit nervous, you know. And he started plumazing the audience by saying things like, you all know me. I'm like yourself. A lot of yous are street traders and dealers. So that's all I'm doing. I'm not doing anything different from what you're doing. And Tony, who was in the audience, stood up and stood beside me. And he said, Dunne, Mr. Dunne, you're dealing in debt and chaos. And you should be ashamed of yourself coming from the same class of people as they are now destroying.
When their prayers failed, the community took matters into their own hands.
We would gather information, we'd invite them to a meeting to present the evidence and ask them to stop. And if they didn't stop them, we'd march on them.
They had watched for years people on balconies selling drugs, kids dying, and nobody cared.
We feel that shortly it'll be impossible for a youngster to get through adolescence without encountering pressure to use drugs.
You sympathised with the communities who were taking matters into their own hands. Sometimes they get misinformation, and sometimes they got it wrong.
The trouble started this afternoon when a number of them occupied the house and barricaded themselves in. They say the house was being used for drug pushing. The family who'd been living there had to be given a Garda escort out of the area.
But the community's rage at Larry Dunne proved vital to Michael's investigation.
The communities were a great source of support because they knew what was going on and they knew who was selling. They knew where they were selling. And in many cases, they knew who they were selling for. And they had no loyalties to these drug dealers. And the local communities would say, look, the guy down the road has a brand new car now and he's moving house. And he hasn't worked a day in his life. And my kids are on heroin.
You just knew that these were the family that were known to bring in the drugs. And the women and the men would be very angry at them. Don't fucking say hello to me, you. How fucking dare you? You know, the cheek of you. To think you can say hello and everything's normal and this is what you're doing.
So people came forward to tell you, what are you going to do about these guys? It was a source of up-to-date information coming from the communities.
The communities weren't the only source of Michael's information. The dealers themselves showed little loyalty to Larry Dunne.
If you look at the nature of the Garda operation, the information that it had, it, knew where to find Larry's drugs and so on. And you would have to say that some of the men around Larry were actually supplying information to the guards.
With this wealth of intelligence, Michael could now aim higher than the dealers on the street.
Our aim was to work up through the channel of distribution to target where the main source of heroin was coming in, to try and take people out at the top of the pyramid. Larry Dunne and some of his criminal associates, they have to be lucky all the time. We only have to be lucky once.
And then Michael got his break when he discovered a weakness to Larry Dunne's operation that could turn the odds in his favour.
A lot of mistakes that some of his people made was using heroin, and it made them careless.
One of his problems, and which really turned out to be his Achilles heel, was that every time a courier brought drugs back from Europe for him, he would test the drugs himself. He would actually sniff some heroin. Larry and the men who were close to him became hooked on drugs.
I think there was an air of invincibility in their mindset, that the people on the ground will get caught, the people who live in the inner city will get caught, the people who are at the front line selling drugs and who are storing the drugs, they'll all get caught, but we're 2 steps back. And I think they just got comfortable and they got complacent.
All Michael needed was for one of Larry Dunne's generals to make a mistake.
One of the inner circle met with me and sold me drugs. He was later sentenced to 7 years. It put them on the back foot. They started to make mistakes. And then it got to the stage that there were more of the inner circle caught than there were free. And it put them under increased pressure. They sort of became paranoid, and it was a level of distrust among everyone they dealt with. He needed that network. He needed to be able to have trusted lieutenants. He was running out of allies. No longer was it a smooth, well-oiled machine.
Drug addiction was finally undermining Larry Dunne's own inner circle. Michael could now build a more detailed picture of how the gang operated.
The heroin trade worked in the form of a pyramid. Somebody at the top of the pyramid, a senior figure, Larry Dunne, who gave the orders and coordinated the sale of drugs. He had his people in Amsterdam and his people in London and Birmingham, where they had close contacts with the people who were bringing the heroin in from Afghanistan and from Pakistan. He would arrange the price through his close associates. Couriers would bring the drugs in. Somebody who would be very trusted would meet them. They would cut up the drugs, give it to dealers on the ground who had one foot as an addict and another foot as a dealer. They were selling to feed their own habit, and they would then pass the money on to the guy at the next tier. He in turn would give it to the guy at the next tier. He would send it up. It would eventually get up to the money man, and the money and the profits generated would be used to bring in more drugs.
But what Michael really needed was evidence to link Larry, who doesn't carry, to the actual possession of drugs. Police got their chance. Intelligence said drugs were being stored at Dunne's family home in Rathfarnham.
All roads led to Larry Dunne in those days. On the day of the search, the detective sergeant had got a drugs warrant to search Larry's house in Rathfarnham. Simultaneously, a jewellery robbery had taken place, and the Serious Crime Squad believed that the jewellery may have been in Larry's house. So the Serious Crime Squad arrived to search Larry's house for jewellery, and a half an hour later, the drug squad arrived.
When Gardaí raided his corporation house, they found heroin, cocaine and cannabis resin.
There was a cocktail of drugs found there. There was £60,000 worth of heroin, cocaine and cannabis found in a pillowcase in his daughter's bedroom.
For Larry Dunne, this was a rare but crucial mistake.
And there was a number of other bits and pieces and cash found, but more importantly, the heroin was found, and therefore there was evidence that he could be charged with. It's very rare for somebody at the top of a pyramid to be in possession of the drugs. I think Larry was so busy at the time trying to coordinate everything he was doing. You could say he dropped his guard. It was great for the ordinary people who saw this guy on a pedestal, proving that crime pays. That's what he frequently said. And a lot of young criminals saw him as a role model. It was a game changer for the young heroin industry that Larry, who doesn't carry, was caught.
Larry Dunne was charged with possession of drugs, but the laws of the time meant he was released pending his trial.
One of the frustrating things for the communities, they couldn't figure out how guys were getting arrested and they were back on the street the next day, but that was the bail law. He realised that worst case scenario, he might go to prison. He needed to make as much money as possible to build a nest egg.
He was on bail for the best part of 2.5 years, during which time he accumulated huge sums of money and increased his activities.
He reorganized his criminal enterprise. He then decided that he needed to relocate.
He was able to buy a house in Sandyford. He was able to pay with that with cash.
No Dublin criminal in the past 20 years had managed to put money aside like that and move up and move out. So he bought Gorse Rock, which was a beautiful location overlooking the Wicklow Mountains. It was a little bit like a fortress. It was going to be more difficult to get to him, but it wasn't over till it was over, and the organisation was running a very profitable enterprise, and they weren't going to go away that easy.
Dunne ramped up his operation. He expanded from the inner city into South County Dublin, bringing the drug epidemic with him.
Not only are we talking about something that is, if you like, in tough working class enclaves, this was much more widespread than that.
Dunleary, like other parts of the city, has witnessed a heroin epidemic. Young people dying without the public really knowing.
He would have controlled, I would say, about 90–95% of the heroin trade. People from the outskirts interacting with people from the inner city were trying out this drug, and the tragedy was this: people start using heroin, it's next to impossible to get off it. So his trade just mushroomed.
I watched my friends for years. I saw how long it took them to get addicted. I woke up sick. My body started shaking. You can't sit in your own skin. It's like spiders crawling all inside you, but yet you're sweating, you're vomiting, you're soiling yourself, and you can't control it. So your normal bodily functions have been taken over by a substance. So if you don't have that substance, that opiate, you can't function.
You're not living, you're just existing. It's a filthy world.
At a human level, talking to a pregnant woman or somebody who's injecting themselves, endangering their lives, was very hard to watch. But professionally, it was exactly what I wanted to be able to show. Now, that sounds a bit hard, but I wanted people to see the true reality.
In 1982, Dunne was still on bail, and local politician Tony Gregory fought to make Dunne's drug epidemic a political issue.
The community is certainly playing its part and will continue to play its part to destroy the heroin barons, as they're called.
He and Mick Rafferty secured a meeting with Irish Prime Minister Charles Haughey and demanded action.
And we gave him the results of what was called the Bradshaw report, which indicated that 10% of young people over the summer had become addicted to heroin, and it was spreading. And we gave him the name of the people, the Dunnes, that we thought were primarily responsible, Larry Dunne in particular. And Haughey picked up the phone to the then commissioner, Patrick McLaughlin, and said, "Patrick, I want you to do something about this problem. And I want it done urgently. I don't want any delay." And he put it down. And he just said to us, "Now, lads, we'll get some action done on solving this problem."
Once Tony Gregory went to Charlie Haughey and complained about the heroin epidemic, the Garda efforts were really ramped up then into the men around Larry Dunne. A lot of surveillance was carried out on them, people who would courier in drugs for them from abroad, people who would sell the drugs on the streets. So you really have this sense of the net closing in on Larry Dunne.
Dublin, 1983. For 3 years, a heroin epidemic has engulfed the city.
10% of young people over the summer had become addicted to heroin.
Police know the man responsible.
All roads led to Larry Dunne. He would have controlled 95% of the heroin trade.
And now they have the evidence to bring him to court.
There was £60,000 worth of heroin, cocaine and cannabis found in a pillowcase in his daughter's bedroom.
In April 1983, Dunne finally faced trial for possession of drugs found at his home in Rathfarnham.
Larry Dunne went on trial before a judge and jury in the Central Criminal Court in Dublin on charges relating to the possession and supply of illegal drugs.
There was a lot of media hype and pressure in relation to the trial. He was eventually coming to court.
At the time, a conviction required all members of the jury to agree on the verdict.
At the end of the day, the jury failed to agree, and the jury were discharged, and another date set for a retrial. So Larry was free to go about his business until the next trial. There was a lot of speculation that people may be intimidated.
The guards who worked on the case always believed that Larry Dunne had actually tampered with the jury.
The jury were nobbled, basically. And that was one of the reasons why it was so important to get him and to send him down from the Gardaí point of view, from everyone's point of view, because otherwise, if these people are allowed to become a law unto themselves, well then, you know, the legitimacy of the state is undermined.
Before he went on trial again, the law was changed and the courts were able to accept majority verdicts then from juries. And what that really meant was, it meant that organised crime was less able to tamper with a jury.
By the time the second trial came along, the pressure had greatly intensified by community groups, a lot of media pressure. This was one of the most important criminals over the last number of years.
The game was probably up at that point, and he really knew that. It became very clear to him on day one of the trial that the evidence against him was just overwhelming.
On the first day of his trial, Dunne was granted bail to go for lunch.
And the fact that he got bail during his trial, to many people, was beyond belief. And it is beyond belief, because he had a track record as long as both your arms and legs.
He hatched the plan, and that plan was to abscond. He was able to, walk out of the court during lunchtime, go for his lunch. He got changed in the toilets in the pub, and really that was all he had to do. He was gone.
He had been in court to hear prosecuting counsel open the case, but after lunch failed to return.
There was outrage that he was let escape, and there was disbelief that he was let escape.
They essentially looked everywhere for him. They arrested about 40 people, raided about 40 houses looking for Larry Dunne. They weren't able to find him.
The search for him became nationwide, and police forces in other countries were also asked to look out for him.
Despite intensive efforts to find him, Larry Dunne remained at large, and community anger was growing.
We just couldn't understand how he was given bail. Extraordinary. And that was sort of flying in the face of justice. I remember one woman saying, these dealers are going to sleep on silk sheets while my daughter lies on a marble cold slab in the morgue. Where's the justice?
It was really embarrassing for the guards. They put in a huge effort over a period of several years to try and catch him and his gang. The embarrassment grew and the anger in political circles grew when the Garda effort to find him failed.
My personal views were that he would be caught because the guards were never going to give up. The investigations were never going to give up. He would be away for a while, but sooner or later he'd surface, and when he'd surface, we'd bring him back. It was difficult to convey that to the communities who felt cheated again.
100 years he should have got. Right, that's enough. A lot of them, yeah, and anyone belongs to him.
Larry Dunne had disappeared, but the destruction he caused was all too visible.
For the wider audience, the Larry Dunne story was the story. But underneath that, the addiction continued and the horror stories continued, and it was still getting worse. There was probably about 5,000 serious heroin addicts.
Families were wiped out. Like my auntie lost 4 of her 5 children, all under the age of 30. Another neighbour lost 5 out of 7 of their children.
My boy was carrying for them all over at 12 years of age.
This is your boy now who's an addict?
Yes.
So much potential lost to the person, the families, the community. Ireland, so many gifted, talented, really, really smart people died from the heroin epidemic. It's unnatural. It's on a scale that I may never fully get over.
This was a man who was really the godfather of heroin in Ireland. 40 years on, there are still thousands of heroin addicts in the country. Really the same areas that Larry Dunne targeted are the ones that have the worst heroin problem now.
Almost 2 years after he disappeared, there was still no sign of Larry Dunne. But Michael's instinct said he would resurface.
Larry was a homebird and he was a dub. He was laying low, assisted by trusted associates in the suburbs of Dublin.
Police did everything they could to make life for Dunne as difficult as possible.
In his absence, he had actually gone on trial. He became the first person in the state to be convicted in their absence before the Central Criminal Court.
Now a convicted criminal, Dunne took his cash and fled Ireland.
Larry ended up going to Spain. He hung out in places like Fungirola, Marbella, Malaga. He lived a lifestyle like the way a tourist would. He spent a lot of time on the beach. He exercised very regularly. He swam in the sea. He went for jogs very often. He also hung out in Irish bars quite a bit. He actually went from Spain to Thailand to try and kick his heroin habit. He underwent a treatment program out there.
But as one of Ireland's most wanted men, Dunne's fugitive lifestyle couldn't last.
He was getting off a ferry at one point over in Portugal. A police officer checked his passport, suspected it was fake, took him into custody and raised the alarm. And when the Portuguese police checked with the Irish police, they obviously realised they had a big fish on their hands. They caught Larry Dunne.
Back in Ireland, it wasn't just a prison sentence waiting for Dunne. There was fury.
Dunne was led out of the court, flanked by a dozen uniformed Gardaí and several armed detectives. The crowd shouted abuse and threw eggs, and at one stage the gate of the courthouse was slammed against the Garda van, causing minor damage.
He received a 14-year sentence, which was a very big sentence in those days. It was a sense of satisfaction to the people in the inner city, albeit limited satisfaction, because they still had children who were heroin addicts, some of whom have died. Their families were destroyed. It was poor comfort to them.
I mean, we genuinely believed that once you got a few of the key dealers, the problem would ease.
It was certainly a significant moment. But I knew with Larry Dunne gone, he'd be replaced and we'd have to rebuild the investigation to focus on the next Larry Dunne.
The roots had been laid. To celebrate Larry Dunne being out of the picture was short-lived because other dealers simply emerged. And unless the cause of the problems are dealt with, you will get the reincarnation of the Larrys.
There's plenty more Larry Dunnes around, and everybody will have to stand together and root them all out. That's what I say.
If you focus so much on getting the big dealer and putting Mr. Big away, creates the illusion you've solved the problem, but of course you haven't. This big gets replaced by a lot of little guys who make it even harder to get on top of the problem, and some of whom will eventually become big themselves.
No one knew this better than Dunne himself.
When Larry Dunne was being led away to start that 14-year prison term, he turned to journalists and said, if you think we're bad, wait till you see what's coming after us. And really, you'd have to say now that he was proven right.
He anticipated his own legacy by that phrase, that if you think I'm bad, you want to see what's coming. But he created what came after him.
The next generation were more cunning, certainly probably smarter. They had learned from the mistakes of the predecessors, and they had learned how to hone their skills in trying to avoid the police.
Throughout the 90s, these new gangs became increasingly violent, even assassinating an innocent journalist.
It was really only when Veronica Guerin was shot dead that we accepted, I think, as a country that we had a serious organised crime problem.
And that was the big wake-up call for the state. They realised that these guys are not just a threat to working-class communities, they're actually a threat to the foundation, of the state.
As generations went on, they became more violent. People then started to get shot and contract killings, and it became more professional, more violent, more global, more sophisticated, and they became more wealthy.
The scene in Dublin's north inner city of the believe they may have discovered the murder scene. So far cost 18 lives. Heavily involved in drug trafficking and violent crime.
The drugs trade then just really took off from the late 1990s. It was all types of drugs that had spread to all kinds of areas all over Ireland. And people of all the social classes were taking, heroin, cocaine, cannabis. We have too many crime gangs now to even name them all. The drugs trade has really spread all over the country, and the world has changed quite significantly from the time of Larry Dunne.
Larry Dunne was released from prison in 1995. But the law wasn't finished with him yet.
Larry Dunne displaying very visible signs of wealth. There was nothing they could do about that at that time. We didn't have legislation which allows for the confiscation of assets. They didn't have legislation specifically enacted to deal with the drug situation.
In 1996, the Criminal Assets Bureau was set up to confiscate the proceeds of crime.
The first thing that the Bureau did was to really target people like Larry Dunne, those old-time guys who had, built up property portfolios, who had, large sums of cash in the bank. That kind of, lavish lifestyle, high roller, being chauffeured around in an expensive car and buying a house in Sandyford for cash, that was all taken from him. Larry Dunne died in May 2020. He was aged 72 and he had been suffering from cancer for quite some time. His health was very poor and really his personal circumstances were very poor indeed. He was actually living in a shed in his daughter's garden during the last years of his life.
Anne was in addiction for 17 years. She found a path to recovery following an attempt to take her own life.
And that's when I took charge of my life back. I knew I had a lot of work to do, so I went into detox and treatment, trauma-informed treatment. I feel alive today. There's education today that I can avail of that I never had the opportunity. It wasn't there. I feed my brain and I give myself knowledge. That's what I do today.
For those who witnessed it firsthand, Larry Dunne's legacy is one of death and destruction.
My abiding memory is doing the interview with the guy shooting up, looking for a vein to put the needle in, and basically killing himself.
He pioneered organised drug distribution in Ireland. It was never there before. He put a structure on it. He brought in the product. And from that, people saw the market and followed on.
His legacy is a whole generation of young people who were lost. And if you go down to the memorial down in Buckingham Street and the Christmas tree at Christmas time, and you see all the names of kids who have died are put up on the tree, that's Larry's legacy. Larry, who doesn't carry, killed people. And his legacy is the grief of mothers and fathers, of course, who lost their kids because of drug addiction.
Young people were dying, communities were devastated. He was making profits. He was a mercenary. The people who worked with him were mercenaries. They didn't care.
Someone that Dana was trying to help, that had to be a huge betrayal.
Every time they looked at an obvious suspect, that person had an alibi.
What I was told completely changed everything.
That was quite a shock.
I couldn't believe it.
It was all a bunch of lies.
Puyallup, Washington, a charming and peaceful town at the foot of Mount Rainier.
The city of Puyallup is about 30 miles south of Seattle, 6 miles east of Tacoma.
It's just a nice little town. It's a community, a lot of families, parks.
Has a small town feel to it. There's a lot of small businesses. The downtown area is easily walkable. It's a terrific little community.
The tranquility is shattered in August 2001 when police get a call from a worried couple who cannot reach their nanny, Dana Laskowski, even after several attempts to contact her.
We got a call from Dana's employers that she hadn't shown up for work. Her employers assured us it was very unusual for Dana to not show up.
An officer is sent to Dana's home to investigate and arrives at 11 a.m., 3 full hours after she was expected to arrive for work.
The officer arrived, he knocked on the front, knocked on the back door, and found the back door ajar. He walked in the back door, walked through the kitchen and through the house, and found an adult female who's deceased on the couch in the living room.
Working off a general description, the officer identifies the victim as Dana Laskowski. The crime scene is secured until detectives from Puyallup PD arrive.
When we found her on the couch, we see the position of her body, and that's unusual. Her one arm is underneath her head, her other arm is behind her back. She's twisted so that her waist is at an awkward angle. The awkward twist to her body is something that we don't normally see in a natural death scene. It just has a sense that it's a murder. We saw abrasions to the neck, and there was a small pool of blood at her mouth. We did see abrasions on her elbows and knees.
The investigator's suspicions are confirmed. Dana was murdered.
What it looked like was a strangulation that occurred on the couch, and then the offender simply left her in the position that we found her.
Forensic technicians searched the living room for evidence.
Primarily, the items that we collected were either hair or fibers, and then extensively processed for fingerprints. When we were processing the carpet, we discovered blood trail or spatter of some sort.
The locations of those were believed to be consistent with the struggle.
Investigators continue their work throughout the rest of the home.
It looked to me like the house had been ransacked. It had a feel that it had been searched, where someone was looking for something. We discovered a basement window that had appeared to have been recently broken, and it was possibly a point of entry.
One of the first things we're going to wonder is, was the victim murdered by a burglar that broke into her house during the night? Or was the murderer somebody that she had invited over the house?
As they wrap up their work at the scene, detectives contact Dana's family to deliver the tragic news.
My son phoned me, and I said, yeah, and he said, Dana's dead. That was it. I was pretty much in shock, and I said, tell me one more time, say what you said, because I didn't want to believe it. You can't imagine that, because, you know, there was no reason.
Born in 1965, Dana's childhood was filled with joy.
She was the happiest kid in the world. So she just was so easy. She just loved life.
Dana was also creative, a special bond she shared with her father, Bill, an award-winning artist.
She was always making things. She was artistic, like me, and was interested in what I did and wanted to help. So we were close.
Just being around her, you felt her energy. You felt her enthusiasm and her zest for living each moment.
As she grew older, Dana developed a nurturing spirit.
She was babysitting from the time she was very young, and she loved the kids, and she always wanted to have a daycare.
In 1989, Dana met Sam and fell in love. The couple married quickly, but from the start, there were complications.
She was having trouble getting pregnant.
In 1993, after years of fertility treatments, Dana's wish of starting a family finally came true.
She was so excited when she found out she was pregnant, because that's what she really wanted all her life, and it was a pretty exciting time.
Dana's delight only grew when she discovered they were having triplets.
She loved the kids, because then she could bake and she could make things and do art. She loved it, she really did.
But by 2000, after 11 years of marriage, the stress of parenting took its toll on their relationship.
Dana told me that she had moved and that they were separated.
As a single mom, Dana worked hard to provide a good home for her triplets. Dana cared deeply about family, and especially for her troubled 17-year-old niece, Amanda, with whom she was very close.
Dana would do anything for Amanda.
Amanda loved Dana, because, you know, Dana was kind of this flashy, artistic type person, and Amanda loved all that too.
Dana was a very kind, caring person, loved her family. Amanda was a frequent runaway. So Dana wanted to guide Amanda out of risky behavior, away from drugs, away from the runaway lifestyle.
Amanda had a rough relationship with her parents, so would often turn to her favorite aunt.
By all accounts, she was the kind of the cool aunt that you could go and actually tell the truth to about your problems. No judgment, just help.
Dana soon became a surrogate mom to Amanda and her best friend, Emily Lauenborg.
Food, showers, a warm place to stay, money. Dana would open her heart and her home to help in any way she could.
She was a mentor and also a friend.
Dana had an open door policy and would always welcome Amanda's friends to her home.
She was very comfortable at her age being amongst teenagers as though they were her peers.
Just everybody loved her.
But now, all that is left is loss and unanswered questions.
For us to lose Dana was so hard.
Losing a child is probably the worst thing that can ever happen. And, you know, she shouldn't have died before me.
Who would want this loving and generous spirit dead? And why?
This murder was very unusual. Right from the start, we had a lot of things that needed to be done in order to find the killer.
Back at the station, detectives start reaching out to those closest to Dana. They begin with her ex-husband, Sam, who they learn has the triplets staying with him.
As the ex-husband, Sam, is a person of interest and the first person we needed to look at. But we couldn't find him. The fact that he was missing, this is significant to us. We have to find him.
Coming up, investigators uncover a dark obsession.
He had kind of gotten fixated on her, and he didn't really take no for an answer.
And alarming secrets.
In the journal, it said 10 things I want to do before I die, and one of those 10 things was kill somebody and get away with it.
That point to a killer no one would ever suspect.
I felt what he was telling me was not possible.
You just can't comprehend that it's real.
And the truth is finally revealed.
That's about as close to a confession as you're going to get.
Police investigating the murder of mother of three, Dana Laskowski, are trying to track down her estranged husband, Sam, when suddenly they receive a surprise call.
Sam actually reached out to the police to try to find out what had happened. Sam, it turned out he had taken his kids camping and away from his phone and away from contact. And so when he got back to civilization, he had all these messages that Dana was murdered.
So we went up to interview Sam, Dana's ex. And so when we confirmed that Dana was murdered, Sam was upset. He would respond to all of our questions, but he's just not the kind of person that elaborates. As we were talking to Sam, we noticed he did have some abrasions on his knees, and that's unusual. We asked him about that, and he said they were from playing baseball. It was baseball season.
Detectives press Sam about his feelings toward Dana.
When asked about his relationship with Dana, Sam described it as they were estranged, but they co-parented their kids, and they've had arguments, but overall, they were trying to make it work.
Sam and Dana just grew apart.
When she moved away, she was so excited. I think it made her feel good about knowing that she could be independent, and I think that was important for her to be able to do that on her own.
We just felt that Sam was mad at Dana for having relocated 3 hours away and had split the family, and the hopes of having a family and a marriage were dashed and destroyed.
Was that enough to push Sam over the edge and harm Dana?
Based on the information that we had about her ending her time with her husband and becoming estranged, we thought Sam had possibly come over to discuss something that has to do with custody, and they'd gotten into a fight, and the fight resulted in Dana's death.
Police ask Sam where he was the night of Dana's murder.
Sam said that he had left his kids at his home and he went and got gas. He showed us a receipt for that gas. He said the next day he went camping with the triplets.
Detectives believe Dana was killed sometime between midnight and 7 a.m., but Sam cannot corroborate where he was at that particular time.
There wasn't an ironclad alibi. He didn't have 3 adults who would be able to say he was with us all night. They were kids, they were sleeping. It was not impossible for Sam to have left the kids and come back to Dana's house and committed the murder.
And we looked at the possibility that he filled up his gas tank, drove to Puyallup, killed Dana, and then drove back to the kids at the home.
Investigators press Sam further.
Sam denied killing Dana. When we approached Sam for his fingerprints and his DNA, he was not necessarily agreeable or cooperative, didn't like the idea that he was a potential suspect. He certainly didn't like the idea that we thought that he might be responsible for her murder.
Sam didn't really want to cooperate with requests for DNA and hair samples.
Sam's behavior may be suspicious, but police have no concrete evidence to tie him to the murder.
You can't charge someone with a crime just because their alibi isn't ironclad. You can't charge them with a crime because they can't prove they were someplace else. You have to prove that they committed that crime. There has to be evidence at the scene that connects the person to the crime. And so in this particular case, they didn't have that with Sam.
While police seek hard evidence against Sam, Dana's autopsy results come in.
The results were that she had died of strangulation.
The cause of death was a fracture of the cricoid cartilage in her throat.
There was a great deal of damage to her throat, her windpipe, and it would have taken somebody very, very strong to have done that kind of damage.
We were going to be looking for an offender who had upper body strength and prone to flying into a rage. Because of the fracture of the cricoid cartilage, it takes a great deal of strength. And a strangulation itself takes a very committed attack. The victim generally fights back. And then the attacker has to double down on the strangulation while the victim is struggling back.
Just to think that Dana struggled and fought for her life, it's just wrong. It's all wrong.
Looking for new leads, detectives turn to Dana's niece.
Police contacted Amanda as she was a relative and somebody who knew the victim. And what Amanda said was that Dana was the kind of person where she could go over, do laundry, maybe get a little bit of money. That was who she was, and that's how she helped out Amanda. And she didn't know what had happened or who would want to murder her aunt.
Detectives also speak to the couple who employed Dana as a nanny. When asked if they knew of anyone who might want to harm Dana, their answer is chilling.
Dana's employers told us that Dana was being stalked by this guy. Her employers told us that Dana had said that if anything happened to her, he'd be the one. And that was significant to us because I'm looking for a killer.
Police investigating the strangling of Dana Laskowski have been told that she was being harassed by a stalker. Could he be her killer?
Dana's employers told us that Dana was afraid of this Patrick. Patrick was a guy that installed cable in Dana's area. He liked her.
Dana had told her sister-in-law and her employer he had kind of gotten fixated on her. Dana, by accounts, let him know that she wasn't interested.
Police learned that Patrick had been trying to contact Dana for over a month straight, and that his pursuit had become even more intense.
Patrick was leaving notes and flowers on her back porch. He wrote some notes that were like poems.
Then, the messages took a disturbing turn.
Dana's friends told the investigators he left her a note letting her know that he had been observing her and seen her doing things inside her home that he wouldn't know unless he was observing her.
Dana mentioned that she was concerned about someone possibly watching her.
The thing that really concerned Dana was that it appeared that he had her under surveillance. Dana had actually told a couple of people that if I ever turn up dead, Patrick did it.
Investigators checked Dana's phone records, searching for any clues.
The phone records indicated that Patrick had phoned Dana repeatedly.
It wasn't just some guy who, sent her a couple extra texts and then disappeared. This was somebody who was going beyond that, doing stalking type things that would be concerning in any context.
When investigators look into Patrick further, they make an alarming discovery.
Patrick was driving a white van. It was a ladder truck. We had neighbors that had identified a white van in the area around Dana's residence prior to the murder.
His work van had been seen in the alley behind the house. It was a white van, so it matched the description that the neighbors had mentioned.
Pretty much demanded that we look at him as a very real suspect in killing Dana.
Did Patrick's obsession with Dana turn deadly?
We immediately got a search warrant for his DNA, for his locker, for his vehicle.
On September 2nd, detectives find Patrick at his home address.
We served the search warrant on him. He was very belligerent and very uncooperative with us during the service of that search warrant.
He didn't want to answer questions. He didn't want to let them in the house. He did the kind of things that you might expect somebody to do if they had in fact been stalking someone and had gotten caught doing that.
Investigators bring Patrick down to the station where they tell him Dana has been murdered.
His demeanor changed 180 degrees from being belligerent and confrontational to Dana is dead. He says, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I didn't kill her. Here, please take my DNA, search everything. I'm not the one who killed her.
Detectives ask Patrick where he was the night Dana was murdered.
Patrick said that he was at work that evening. He then hung out with some friends and went to bed.
Once given the information for his alibi, investigators looked into it, and they were actually able to verify it. He had an alibi and could not have committed the murder.
We also ruled out Patrick's ladder truck with the van the neighbors told us that they saw drive around Dana's residence. There was nothing in the service of the search warrant or in our investigation that indicated that Patrick wasn't being truthful with us.
Given what he had done and the ways in which he had scared Dana prior to that, He's very lucky that his alibi could be confirmed.
Having cleared Patrick, investigators now focus on another man in Dana's life, Michael, who they learn was having a long-distance relationship with her.
Michael lived up in Canada, worked in the film industry. Dana met him when she was up in Canada visiting one of her friends.
And they hit it off, and so they started to date. But he stayed in Vancouver, and she was down in Puyallup, and that's a several-hour drive from Puyallup to Canada.
Friends tell police that their relationship was not without problems.
They said Michael would party to the level of like a teenager, that he was at a certain level of partying that Dana didn't approve of. And so Dana was a little uncomfortable with that.
There'd been a point where Dana had broken it off, but he was still interested, so they tried to make it work and get back together.
But when detectives dig deeper, they learn Michael has a darker side.
We were told that Michael was a biker, that he was a heavy drug user.
Police also uncover a significant piece of information.
Dana confessed to a friend that she'd had a one-night stand. And when Dana had that one-night stand, she was still in a relationship with Michael.
Could this have been a motive for Michael to kill Dana?
When we found out that Dana had a one-night stand, we looked at Michael as a potential suspect, possibly murdering Dana out of revenge.
Investigators searching for the killer of single mother Dana Leskowski have a new possible suspect, her boyfriend Michael. Detectives want to know if an infidelity may have led to Dana's death.
That caused us to believe that we had to rule him out as a person of interest. Michael lived in Canada, so we went up, and when we talked to Michael about Dana's death, it appeared to us that he was very emotionally overcome by it, that Dana was the love of his life, and that she had been taken out of his life, and that he was very seriously grieved.
Michael also tells police he knew about the one-night stand, but had moved on. Detectives press him further.
Michael told us that when he was on the phone with Dana on the night of her death, that she seemed a little guarded to him. He told her that he loved her, and then she didn't tell him back that she loved him, and he thought that was a little odd.
He didn't like how the conversation ended.
And that prompted him to want to get on the road and come down and see her and see if everything was okay.
Michael claims he never made it to see Dana.
He said he was stopped at the border and he was turned away. He had some legal matter up in Canada that wasn't settled, and so he wasn't admitted. There was border crossing records that verified his alibi, that he did not cross the border.
He got stopped by Border Patrol, and so he was able to show definitively that he was not anywhere near Puyallup at the time of Dana's murder.
We didn't find the evidence to support that Michael had committed the murder.
Michael is ruled out as a suspect. Police also determined the man Dana had a one-night stand with was nowhere near her house on the night of the murder.
At this point of the investigation, we just were really kind of at a dead end.
I mean, there were all these people who would have been really good, solid suspects in any homicide investigation, but all of them had alibis, and all the alibis were verified.
I was frustrated that the case wasn't moving forward, that it wasn't advancing.
With the case at a standstill, detectives search for any detail they may have overlooked.
Where Dana's ashes are inurned, there's a book, and people can go and write their memoirs.
The book has been left open for comments since Dana's funeral.
If the perpetrator was someone who went to the funeral, and if the perpetrator was someone who maybe has some guilt about that, they may have left a clue behind.
When detectives look at the book, one entry, written over a month after the funeral, grabs their attention.
One of the memoirs that was written by Dana's niece, Amanda. And she said, "I'm so sorry I wasn't a better niece for you. 34 days clean and sober, it's all for you."
That was significant. There was something about the way that she'd written it that suggested it was a communication to Dana of remorse and to make amends for what had happened. And it was something that was significant enough to follow up on.
Why did Amanda write that she had let Dana down? Detectives have a hunch that she may know more about her aunt's death than she's been letting on.
That's it. That's the key. The key is the niece. I called Amanda in for an interview. When I asked her, "What do you know?" she said, "I wasn't there. I don't know what happened."
With Dana gone, Amanda has been missing a mother figure, getting into trouble, and as detectives learn, spending time with a rough crowd.
In the center of Puyallup downtown, we had Pioneer Park, and a lot of troubled teens would hang out there. The park kids called themselves the Park Rats. Amanda usually would be out around town in the middle of the night, hanging out with the Park Rats.
Dana would often welcome Amanda's circle of friends into her own home. Could one of the Park Rats that Amanda knows have been somehow involved in Dana's death?
And I talked to her about who of her friends would meet this profile of having upper body strength, prone to flying into a rage. And Amanda said, "Well, it sounds like you're describing Blaine." She said Blaine actually attacked her on a couch, and it was a rather brutal attack.
Blaine had come on to her, and that she had rejected him, and that he had become violent.
Had Blaine tried the same thing on Dana, only for things to turn deadly?
Blaine had been at Dana's house before in some casual get-togethers, and possibly Dana would have rebuffed that advance, and that Blaine would be the kind to fly into a rage.
Then Amanda reveals something else.
Amanda said that while we were processing her Auntie Dana's crime scene, she was across the street. She ran into Blaine there. She said that Blaine had scratches on his arms. When I get this information from Amanda, I look into Blaine and I find that he's got a violent past and he has quite a criminal history.
Police learn that Blaine's rap sheet is extensive and littered with drug and gun charges.
I felt he was a very good person of interest in the murder of Dana Laskowski.
But there's a big problem. Blaine is no longer in Washington.
I found him living in the far southeast part of the United States. I wanted to bring him back to Washington to collect his DNA, to talk to him as a person of interest. But he was not cooperating.
As investigators attempt to extradite Blaine, they seek out known criminals he's associated with and find one of them, a friend of Blaine's, serving time in jail.
I sat down with him and I said, "I'm looking at Blaine as being responsible for the murder of Amanda's aunt. He's got this upper body strength, he's prone to violence." And he looked at me and he said, "Blaine didn't kill Amanda's aunt." What I was told completely changed everything.
Detectives hunting the killer of Dana Laskowski have a new suspect, Blaine, the troubled friend of Dana's beloved niece, Amanda. With Blaine out of state, investigators grill his friend in jail, and what he tells them is explosive.
So police suggested to him that maybe Blaine had been involved. The friend said, "No, it's not Blaine, it's Emily."
He said, "Emily killed Amanda's aunt."
It's a stunning allegation. 17-year-old Emily Lauenborg is Amanda's best friend and someone who Dana treated like a daughter.
I felt what he was telling me was not possible because Dana always had an open door and was always welcoming to Emily.
Police found out that a lot of times Amanda and Emily would show up at Dana's house.
Dana was somebody that Emily could go to safely regardless of the circumstances, and Dana would take her in.
So as you can imagine, that was quite a shock to the team.
To confirm his story, investigators speak to other members of the Park Rats.
Two of these kids told me, yes, Emily killed Amanda's aunt. Blaine didn't kill Amanda's aunt.
Nobody doubts that Emily did it. Nobody.
One of these individuals told us that Emily was doing a lot of drugs.
Had Emily's reckless behavior somehow played a role in Dana's death?
I was told that they all had nicknames for each other, and that Emily's nickname was Mutant.
The first nickname that we called her was the Mutant, because she was stronger than any other girls that we knew. Everybody's scared. She'll beat your ass. She'll knock you out.
She was tough. She would challenge them to wrestling. She would beat them in wrestling. She was very intense.
And I was told she's able to choke people. She would wrap one arm around their neck, grab the other hand, and flip their body over her hip. And that was consistent with the body position that we found Dana Laskowski in. Twisted at the waist, with one arm behind her back and an injury to the neck.
And so the initial thought that it can't be her was slowly replaced with, well, maybe it could be her. She's intense, she's strong, and everybody seems to be kind of scared of her.
Did Emily actually kill Dana? And if she did, what could be her motive for committing such a heinous crime? Investigators bring Emily in for an interview.
I sat down with her, and I had a tape recorder. She said, "Aren't you going to turn that thing on?" I would say she was quite self-confident, a little cocky.
She was not particularly cooperative with efforts to talk to her about what happened.
And I said, you know, here you are, sitting in a police station under suspicion of murder, and you're playing this game with a detective. And I said, look at these people right here that have told us you killed her. And she said, those people are lying, and that she didn't do it. She got very angry. Those people are lying.
When investigators ask Emily where she was the night of the murder, she dodges the question.
She was bartering and arguing with me and not really giving me a clear defense and denial.
Officers obtain a warrant to search Emily's residence.
One of the items that they recovered from Emily's apartment was a shirt that Emily had taken from Dana.
One of her friends told us that Emily had a black shirt that belonged to Dana, and that she actually wore that to Dana's funeral. We went back to the pictures of the funeral and did see that Emily was wearing a black shirt.
One possible explanation for that was rubbing her nose in it. Not only did I kill you, but I'm wearing your blouse to your funeral.
The search uncovers more incriminating evidence.
And we found this journal. And in the journal, it said, 10 things I want to do before I die. And one of those 10 things was kill somebody and get away with it.
One of the statements in the journal that Emily wrote in her own hand when talking about Amanda, because she'd gotten into an argument with Amanda, was, I could effing strangle that bitch just like her aunt.
So that was very significant. I was invigorated because I had something.
That's about as close to a confession as you're going to get. It is absolutely sufficient for me to take that to a jury and say, this is her admitting that she killed Dana Laskowski.
On March 13th, 2003, Emily is charged with first-degree murder.
When I found out that Emily did what she did, I couldn't believe it.
When you find out that such a young person could take a life, how is that possible? Someone that Dana was trying to help and care for, that had to be a huge betrayal. You just can't fathom it. You can't comprehend it. It's devastating.
Though Emily is in custody, prosecutors know most of the evidence against her is circumstantial. So they circle back to Amanda.
It had become pretty clear that Amanda was going to be the key to solving this. We needed Amanda to crack Because absent that, or a confession, there wouldn't have been enough to prove that Emily committed that crime.
If Amanda did know what happened, why hadn't she told police? And why had she covered for her best friend?
So I meet with Amanda and I said, listen, Amanda, you have led us on a wild goose chase. Starting off with Blaine, who was in another state. He didn't do this. You have not come forward with this right from the start. You know what? This is a case of conspiracy after the fact. So tell me what happened. That's when she really cried and sobbed.
Police have charged local teen Emily Lauenborg with the murder of Dana Laskowski. Now, investigators suspect Emily's best friend, Amanda, Dana's own niece, may also be involved.
I said, all right, tell me what happened. You've sent us on every possible goose chase and every rabbit trail you could head us down. It was all a bunch of lies.
Through tears, Amanda makes a horrific revelation.
Amanda disclosed that she and Emily came to Dana's house and they came to the back door. They were high on some drugs and they just went up to try to get some money. And Emily was rude and Dana said, you girls have to go.
Things quickly escalate.
Emily was being belligerent and Dana touched Emily to kind of guide her out the door, and Emily just exploded into a rage or attack.
Basically, she attacked her, put her in that wrestling hold, and squeezed too tight with some kind of scarf or fabric.
Amanda said she turned around because she didn't want to watch what was happening.
But she heard a crack, and she heard a gurgle. She heard Dana gasping for her life, and then she didn't hear anything. And that was because Dana was dead.
And then they took the money and left.
It seemed to be, by Amanda's account, that it was kind of an explosive situation that got out of control. They didn't go to the house to murder Dana.
I was told that Emily had said that Amanda was always ditching her for her aunt.
Emily, she was jealous of Dana.
It's my opinion that the motive Emily had was to get Dana's influence out of Amanda's life, and Emily just went over there with the intention of getting Dana so mad at Amanda that Amanda wouldn't be welcome at Dana's anymore, and that Emily would have achieved what she wanted, and that the murder simply got out of control because of emotions and drugs.
But why didn't Amanda come forward earlier to tell the truth about what happened that night?
I asked her, why didn't you tell us right up front, right at the start? She said, because of my family. It's so bad now. What's it going to be like now when they find out?
She wasn't involved in the murder, but she was involved because she was there at that time, and I don't know why she didn't do anything. It was upsetting and surprising to all of us.
Prosecutors need Amanda's testimony to have any hope of convicting Emily for murder. Amanda agrees and will not face any charges herself.
If she's charged with a crime, then she has the right to remain silent.
She was the star witness for the case. If we had charged her criminally, we couldn't have called her as a witness.
Despite the agreement, prosecutors fear Amanda won't keep her side of the deal.
The biggest challenge for us, from a prosecution standpoint, was that setting aside Amanda's testimony, everything else was circumstantial. Wearing a blouse can be explained away. An angry journal entry can also be explained away. I think the only way that we could have been successful in front of a jury was to have Amanda take the stand. The problem was knowing exactly where Amanda's loyalties would be. She was very conflicted. And there was definitely a chance that Amanda could have taken the stand and said, I lied to the police when I said what I saw, and I didn't see any of that.
I was very concerned that The jury was going to listen to this case and look at Emily and say, I just don't buy it.
This is a case where, had we taken it to a jury, all of those questions that had come up in the investigation, all the initial leads, all of the doubts that it could really have been Emily, all the alternate explanations were certainly enough that it could have been that a jury had decided that we just didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Prosecutors face a difficult choice. Risk Emily walking free after a jury trial, or guarantee at least some jail time with a plea deal.
Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is to make sure that we hold the killer responsible. Emily was allowed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter.
On January 21st, 2004, over 2 years after Dana's murder, Emily is formally sentenced.
Emily was charged as an adult. Her sentence was just under 7 years.
Even though Emily is sent to prison, her sentence brings a mix of emotions.
I felt a sense of relief that someone was now being held accountable for Dana's death, but I did feel angry.
I thought, well, at least it's something, you know. But it just was amazing that you could take the life of a young mother and only get like 6 years. Doesn't make sense.
Dana's family was upset that the sentence was so light. They felt that the person responsible for taking the life of Dana should have been given a stiffer sentence.
It was really tragic. And one of the things about the criminal justice system is it doesn't put things back the way they were. It just tries to hold people responsible so people can move forward.
I cried every night. I think I must have cried for a year. I miss her a tremendous amount, and I will think about her forever.
I don't think we ever will get over the loss of something so tragic.
I can't really say her family ever had closure, because to them, the loss was the loss of Dana. A gavel dropping doesn't undo that loss.
I miss her a lot.
I think Dana would want to be remembered as a loving mother, a loving friend, and a loving child.